We have a lot of little eaters in this house, and I love to cook from scratch. Join me this week as I cook for my people and share it all with you. The first thing on my agenda is to get a sourdough pie crust going. This is a double recipe. I like this because you can get it going and it can sit in the fridge for as long as you need. It can sit in there for weeks. I don't really recommend that, but you can do that. We've done that. Or it can sit in there for a few days. I like keeping these in the fridge ready at any time to make either a chicken pot pie, or in the case of this week, we're going to make a ground beef pot pie. Of course, good for desserts, good for a quiche. It just doesn't hurt to have pie crust sitting in the fridge. Oh, last week I showed you, or not last week, but a few weeks ago, I showed you how I make Pop-Tarts with pie crust. So it's not going to hurt. If you're ever bored in your kitchen, and you know, like that's ever going to happen if you're busy, which everybody is to some extent, right? We're all busy. So you're probably not going to be bored. But if you ever find yourself with a few extra minutes, bored's not really the right word. We can always find something better to do, right? But if you find yourself with a few minutes in your kitchen, make a pie crust, stick it in the fridge, and you'll thank yourself later. Another thing in your kitchen you could get going if you have a few extra minutes is broth or stock. I had some bones in the freezer, not a whole lot of them, in a Ziploc bag. And so I'm putting them in with some peppercorns, garlic, celery, parsley, carrots. You could do onions. And then throughout this week, as I make more whole chickens, I'm going to add bones to it. So it's called the perpetual stock pot. I heard about this concept years ago, but you can keep a stock pot going on the back of your stove and just pull from it and add more bones and water and whatever little scraps you make throughout the week, like carrot peels or potato peels, things that will make it more delicious. Maybe not potato peels, but garlic and onion and herbs, anything like that would make it really delicious. And then at the end of the week, you can strain it all off, put it in the fridge, and restart the next week. This is a good way to have broth all throughout the week. I'm also making some sourdough naan. This is a brand new recipe over on the Farmhouse on Boone blog. You can go to farmhouseonboone.com, search naan for the exact amounts. You can knead this in the mixer, or you can perform a few stretch and folds throughout the day, depending on how in a hurry you are. I like to get this going and let it sit out for 6 to 8 hours before using, but you could also make it right away. It does have baking powder in it for an additional leavening agent. I'm going to have that just sitting on the back of the stove. Meanwhile, I'm going to get a spatchcock chicken going. This is a whole chicken where down the back or the underneath part of the chicken, you kind of break it open so it cooks more evenly. I also like to make it this way instead of just leaving it all the way whole because it cooks faster. So I put oil, garlic powder, onion powder, some herbs, some pepper. That makes it delicious and easy, and it can sit in the oven for, I don't know, an hour and a half. I like this meal because a lot of the different parts of it, I can get going ahead of time and then have it for dinner. So in the afternoon or even the morning, I can mix up the naan dough. I can bake the chicken, let it cool. It's easier to work with when it's cool. That's one thing I really don't like doing, is making a whole chicken whenever I'm in a hurry for dinner, because it's hard to get it off the bone whenever it's really hot. One way that I'm able to feed our large family from scratch and affordably is by stocking our pantry with staple items from Thrive Market. Thrive Market is the sponsor of today's What We Eat in a Week video, and I've been loving their products for so many years now. Thrive Market is a membership-based online grocery store that specializes in natural and organic ingredients. I get things like my einkorn flour, seasonings, and canned items, organic canned tomatoes and pasta sauces and condiments. I also get avocado oil fried chips for quick lunches on the go and snack bars. Just yesterday, our family went to hike, a very long hike. And normally on a Sunday, we go to family for lunch and dinner. And so I don't have it in my thought process to think about meals on that day. So after church church, I said to my husband, we completely forgot about lunch. But I had bobos and I had avocado oil chips. I had a loaf of sourdough bread, some cheese and some salami. And so I ran into the house after church and packed up a lunch in less than 10 minutes. I try not to rely on that all the time, but just having that available is a game changer, and I can get so many of those great snacks from Thrive Market. I love that on the Thrive Market website, you can sort by dietary preference. So if you are paleo, gluten-free, dairy-free, you can make it to where you only see those options. It makes it a very streamlined shopping experience. Orders over $49 ship straight to your door for free, making it very, very convenient. Thrive Market is offering Farmhouse on Boone viewers 30% off your order plus a free gift worth up to $60 by using my link, thrivemarket.com/Farmhouse on Boone. Thrive is running a sale on bars and snacks this week. So this is a great time to sign up and check out Thrive Market for yourself. The link will be in the description box below. Continuing on with my naan, it's a lot like flatbread, but it has some yogurt in it and it's very soft and pliable. The baking powder also makes it a little bit fluffier. So delicious. This will be a staple in our kitchen. You can print the recipe over on farmhouseonboone.com. I'm going to make a tikka masala sauce, starting with onions and garlic and some oil, adding in tomato paste and then garam masala, chili powder, turmeric, and ginger. You can find recipes for this online. I did not get this off of my website. I believe, where did I get this? I don't remember exactly where I got this, but just search tikka masala. Now, normally you cook the chicken in the sauce, and that's really good because it makes the chicken really soft. I didn't have any chicken breast. I get chicken from my sister's farm, and she has ran out of chicken breast until June. So currently all she has is whole chickens. That's okay. You can use whole chicken for anything that you could use chicken breast for, except for it's difficult to cook it in the sauce unless you cut the whole chicken up, which I did not want to do. So I'm just making a sauce, baking the chicken in the oven, and then I'm gonna top the chicken with some sauce over rice with some naan, put some cilantro on it. Also, I believe the recipe for this sauce that I found online called for tomato sauce. I did not have that, so I just used a can of whole tomatoes and then blended it up with my immersion blender. Every recipe can be adapted. So if you don't have exactly what it calls for, no worries. You can find ways to still create something really delicious. And this meal most certainly was. All the kids even loved it too. Another new recipe on the Farmhouse on Boone blog is this ground beef pot pie. I've made chicken pot pie on here a lot. I oftentimes make pot pie more of a cobbler style, if you will, because I put sourdough biscuits on top. But this is a ground beef pot pie, and it is a true pot pie in that I'm going to use that pie crust I made earlier to house the ground beef mixture as opposed to putting biscuits on top. And it is just so much more delicious. And in some ways, I always kind of think like biscuits are so much easier than pie crust, so it's a fast and easy way to put biscuits on top instead of putting it inside a pie crust. But really, it's not much harder, if at all, to make a pie crust, because in either case, you're mixing up a few dry ingredients like flour and salt, and in the case of biscuits, some baking powder, maybe a little bit of sugar. And then you're cutting in the butter and adding some sourdough starter. So really, it's basically the same thing. I guess the only difference that makes pie crust maybe ever so slightly harder is you have to roll it out really thin instead of patting out the dough and cutting it. But for the difference in taste, I think it's worth it. I do like, in both cases, sourdough biscuits and sourdough pie crust. I like them to sit in the fridge for several days to get a little bit sour for some of that long fermentation benefits. This recipe is simple. It comes together like most that have a basic sauce, vegetable, and meat. So I browned the meat, and then in the cast iron skillet, I added the onions, celery, mushrooms, garlic, carrots. I'm adding a bit of flour to the fat. So I kept the beef fat in there as well as a little bit of olive oil. That will thicken the sauce. I'm using my homemade broth. Then I'll just let it simmer for a bit, add salt and pepper to taste. I added oregano and basil, just dried seasoning, a little bit of pepper. I'm adding a bit of Worcestershire sauce, a little bit of cream. That I'm letting all of that simmer and thicken. Then I add in my peas. I usually do this last because I don't like them to get a real pale color. I like them when they're a bit brighter, which happens if I don't cook them too awful long. I'll add the beef back in after everything is all thickened. Now I'm taking my pie crust that I got out of the refrigerator, dividing it in half because this is a 2-crust recipe. Usually when I'm doing some kind of pot pie or even a pie, I try to make it slightly not cut in half. Like I'll give a little bit more to one half than the other because you always need a bit more pie crust for the bottom of a pie or the bottom of a pot pie than you do for the top because you wrap the edges of the bottom around the top. Typically, I try to do that. It looks here like they're kind of more even, but that is usually my goal, or that's what I'd recommend to you. I'll add my beef mixture into this crust, then put the top one on. Then I'll just crimp the edges together, sort of seal them with my hands, fold them over on top of the whole pot pie. I'm going to put a few slits in the top for baking, brush it with an egg wash, and then bake it until it's crispy and golden and set up. It does help if you don't bake this right before dinner so that it has a chance to cool and for the liquid or the sauce to set up a bit. It is perfect after that. I like to let it sit for at least a half hour. Sometimes there's not time for that, but usually if I'm making something like this, I'll make it in the morning if it's going to be for lunchtime. Sometimes I'll even make it in the morning if it's going to be for afternoon and just kind of keep it on low in the oven. Or I'll make it in the afternoon, let it sit out a good long while before dinner time. It's a really good make ahead type of thing. And you can at least make certain parts of it ahead of time, like chop the vegetables, brown the beef, make the pie crust, and then assemble it closer to dinner time. But still, it's nice to have it sit and get nice and firm. We are a tag team in making plates here and handing them out to all the kids, and we're going to enjoy this for dinner. I am really trying to build up the dinner recipes over on farmhouseonboone.com. I mean, over there you can find every last sourdough thing you could ever dream up in your brain, at least I think. And it seems like every time I think that, I think of something else to try. But I'm pretty sure we're getting there on that. But I don't have a lot of my dinner recipes that I show over here. And so I'm trying to put those together into blog posts. It sounds easy enough, but it's hard to come up with amounts and ingredients when a lot of times I just throw things together. But I'm working on that. And another new recipe that is over on the blog is sausage meatballs. I get my sausage from my sister's farm, New Hartford Farm Co. She raises Berkshire pigs and they are so good. Who doesn't love sausage in a meatball? It's so much better than beef. I do a lot of beef meatballs as well, but these are really good. Sometimes I'll do half sausage, half beef. If we have a lot of venison, I like to cut the venison with either beef or sausage to make them more delicious. But the most indulgent, the most delicious, in my opinion, is straight sausage. So I'm adding garlic and onion and parsley and Worcestershire and freshly grated Parmesan cheese. Again, these are over on the website if you want to print it out, if I'm not giving exact amounts here. The key ingredient is homemade breadcrumbs. I make these whenever at the end of the week, I have a lot of little bits of sourdough bread and bagel and biscuit and all kinds of sourdough things. I toast them in the oven, blend them, and then I keep a jar of sourdough breadcrumbs that I can use for so many applications. I am doubling this because we have a larger family and we are totally fine with having leftover meatballs. This was supposed to be a super low-key dinner. I was going to get out box pasta and boil it, serve it with sausage meatballs, but we had an evening at home, so we didn't have any plans at all, and my daughter likes to make homemade pasta, and I almost told her no, because I'm like, ugh, this is going to be such a mess. And sometimes I go for long stretches of time without making something, and I build up in my head that it's harder than it really is. And that is how I was feeling about pasta. Like, oh, that's such a mess. That's hard. Even though I've done it a lot, it's been a while. And so I had to read back through the recipe and familiarize myself with it again. And then always after making anything, I wonder why I don't do it all the time, because it's just not that hard. And she remembered that about pasta. She's like, well, what's the big deal? It's just flour, starter, eggs. You mix it all up, put it through our attachments on the KitchenAid that flatten it out and cut it. And so she convinced me, and the kids really enjoyed doing that because they like to see how long they can make the noodles. So instead of just making, foot long or whatever pasta noodles typically are when they come in a box, they try to make them 3 feet, 4 feet long by holding on to it as it's coming out. So that's the fun challenge that kids enjoy so much. I'm also making glazed balsamic carrots. This was another thing I was not planning to do. Again, it was supposed to be sausage meatballs and box pasta. But when I was explaining to Luke what we were having for dinner, he asked me what we were having for dinner, and I told him what it was. He was like, well, do you have any veg? And so I was like, well, yes, I have veg. It's not that hard. I don't know why I hesitate there. It's not that big of a deal. All I need to do is cut up some carrots, toss it with balsamic vinegar, oil, maple syrup, and some salt. It's as easy as that. Put it in the oven with the meatballs and serve it alongside. Why not? I don't really know that pasta is usually served with carrots, but it's a good side for any dish, in my opinion. We're getting a little bit wild with the pasta. We boil it for a few minutes and then serve it with some canned pasta sauce. We did not make the pasta sauce from scratch, although whenever it's summer and we have all the tomatoes, we will be doing that as well. The next meal starts with a hot oven, a couple of russet potatoes, and a spatchcock chicken. Today I am making homemade gnocchi, einkorn gnocchi, chicken, and a creamy gnocchi sauce. Over on the blog, again, this is just test out new dinner recipes over on the blog week, I guess. I have a gnocchi sauce recipe. It is creamy, it is delicious, and it pairs wonderfully with the einkorn gnocchi recipe and a whole chicken or chicken breast, whatever you have. It could also be really good with something like sausage meatballs or just some ground sausage or beef. Really, you could pair it with just about anything. But I had 2 whole chickens thawed out in the refrigerator, and so that is what I'm going to use today. I am caramelizing or sauteing, but a little bit longer than sauteing, some onions and some garlic and butter, adding in cream sauce and mascarpone, however you were supposed to say that, freshly grated Parmesan and Gruyere cheese. You could also use cheddar cheese, that would work great. A little salt and pepper. This summer and spring when you have fresh herbs, those would taste great in there. You could either blend it up with an immersion blender or just leave it as it is. We just left it. We didn't blend it up this time. Either way will work. Depends on how squeamish your kids are about things like onions and garlic. A lot of times kids don't mind if they taste it. They just don't want to see it. I love meals throughout the week that have a lot of overlap. So a lot of meals this week had freshly grated Parmesan. That's another place where you could bulk prepare. You could grate a whole bunch of Parmesan cheese and just use it throughout the week. I'm also adding it here to my gnocchi. So I'm mashing up the potatoes, adding in einkorn flour, freshly grated Parmesan, ricotta, egg. The potatoes were taking way too long to bake in the oven because we were in sort of a time crunch. I didn't have all day. I wish I'd prepared this earlier, but I did not. So I put them in a pot with some water and steamed them. It's so much faster. So I took them out of the oven, put them in the pot, and then they steamed within 5 or 10 minutes the rest of the way because I needed them nice and soft so I could mash them up and make a nice smooth gnocchi dough. I usually divide this into several parts so that it's easier to roll out and work with. I lightly dust the counter with flour, roll it out, chop it into tiny pieces, boil it for 5-ish minutes. You definitely don't want to boil it too long or it becomes total mush. So if you ever have trouble with it, just know, boil it less time. You want it to stick together and not fall apart whenever you stir it into the sauce. We have a lot of tiny eaters in this house. 6 of our kids are 11 and under. So we make plates up on the bar top and then hand them out. It's easier that way right now as opposed to everybody making their own plate. I let the older kids make their plate. You know, sometimes they want more of something, less of something. But the little kids, I just make all their plates. We hand them out. My son calls, whenever I make crispy chicken, he calls the skins the peels. Everybody wants the peels because they're crispy and they are delicious. Another prep thing I like to do, I know I talk about it all the time, but I need reminders myself that I need to do this. So I'm going to remind you as well. Prep multiple sourdough things at one time and ahead of time. This saves so much time because you already have out all the basic ingredients. You have the starter out, the salt, the flour, you have your mixer dirty. So anytime you have the chance, maybe in an evening, that's when I'm doing this right now, prepare several things. So right now I am getting going a batch of sourdough pizza dough in order to make later this week some sourdough calzones. And then I'm also doing a Pullman loaf. I bought a Pullman pan, which if you're wondering what that is, picture the shape of a loaf of bunny bread at the store. It's long and it's square and it has those perfect slices. I bought this Pullman pan months ago and it took me forever to actually scale up my recipe to fit it in there. But I finally have been working with the dimensions. This recipe will be over on the blog as well to fill up this Pullman pan. Now, the first time I made it, I definitely underbaked it because it's just so large, but it's the right size of dough, which was a little bit tricky to figure out. I got both of those going last night, let them sit out in the pantry, and today I'm going to shape and rise. It's already risen to the top of the Pullman pan, this bread that will bake up like bunny bread. I'm so excited to have this in my life. I've been meaning to try it forever. I think it's so neat to have something that slices really easily. So for dinner tonight, this is not a very conventional dinner, but we have tons of eggs. I know I talk about that all the time. We're trying to get eggs in every which way possible that our kids will accept eating this many eggs into our diet. So tonight I'm toasting my Pullman loaf slices, adding lots of butter, and then I'm going to cook some eggs on the cast iron skillet, add some cheese, and just sling out sandwiches so that this will make a really easy dinner and also filling and healthy and high in protein. We are big proponents of breakfast for dinner over here. When I did some prep work the other night, I did sourdough pizza crust. I let it sit in the pantry for probably 16 hours. The pantry in our house is not a super hot spot, so it can stand to sit a lot longer than other spots in our house that would cause the dough to over ferment, especially in the middle of summer. That can happen. But whenever dough has added fat, it takes a lot longer for it to over ferment and become that loopy, gloppy, sloppy mess that can happen whenever you let a sourdough boule over ferment. I let it sit until it was bubbly and tall, and then I popped it in the refrigerator for another day or so until I'm ready to use it. Well, tonight I'm going to make sourdough calzones. You can make these as small or as big as you want to. It's with my sourdough pizza crust recipe. Now, I do have over on the blog a particular recipe for sourdough calzones if you want more specific instructions, but essentially you're taking the sourdough pizza crust, kneading it in a mixer or by hand with stretch and folds, allowing it to ferment for 8 hours or as long as you really want without letting it over ferment, but also getting all of those good gut healthy benefits, and then dividing it, adding your toppings, folding it, and baking it. So it's just pizza, but a different way, which is always fun. The kids enjoy it. Fill it with whatever toppings excite you and mozzarella cheese and sauce. I like to use canned pizza sauce instead of pasta sauce, which I've done for so many years. But I found out about this canned pizza sauce lately, and I don't know why I was missing it in my life because it's thicker, and so it doesn't cause the dough to become soggy. It's just really good. It's definitely the move when it comes to sourdough pizzas. I hope that you enjoyed going along with me as I cooked from scratch for my family of 10 this week. If you are brand new, go ahead and hit that subscribe. I make videos like this every single week. Thank you so much for stopping by our farmhouse.